Okay, welcome everybody to the Research in Action webinar. Just want to make sure before I go a lot further that everyone can hear me. We will actually have the option, because we're under 25 participants who registered for this one. So we'll have the option of just unmuting everyone. So if you want to comment or ask a question, then you can just speak, but then you have the responsibility of if there's background noise or if you're typing or doing anything in your space, we want to avoid the background noises and echo, but if you are able to control that, you can remain unmuted and be able to jump in whenever you want. Otherwise, we'll be figuring that out then too, and we might have to mute you if there's some background noise there for you. This is Research in Action, issue number 8. It's our Mentoring Across Generations, Engaging 50-plus Adults as Mentors. Many of you have participated in the past and know that this is based on Mentor's Research in Action series, based on that from the Research and Policy Council from Mentor, and they created these 10 briefs or 10 research and action issues that we have cruised through. I can't believe we only have this one and 2 more to go before we're done with the research and action series. We do hope to continue these webinars though and focus on other more recent research or things that have come up that we can continue to discuss. So just to put that out there, especially to those of you who've been here all along, if you have ideas for topics or other research that we would want to cover in 2010, then be sure to let us know. So in the Research in Action, the briefs that you can download from Mentor, or you might have one of the sleek gray boxes with 10 issues printed in them, but they each include a peer-reviewed article written by a leading researcher. They include some sort of action item. Sometimes it's a tool, sometimes it's just additional information or a template. In the case of this month, it's more about some frequently asked questions and finding out a little bit more about how do you engage 50-plus adults as mentors. And it also includes a list of additional resources, so there's tons more resources. What's kind of nice about this piece is that if you download this PowerPoint presentation, then we've got additional resources, and we also have, instead of having to type in the links, we've got them all just hyperlinked so that you can go and find those different online resources and things. So if you do download this presentation, that's a nice piece that you have. So the way that the webinar works is that we will review the research presented in the article. So the articles are pretty brief, but there's tons of information, so we try to get through that. And really, it says that action dialogue happens second, but we can really be dialoguing throughout the entire presentation. So feel free to ask questions or make comments and submit questions as we go, and also share resources. With that in mind then too, knowing that we do have Dr. Andrea Taylor from Temple University. She's the author of this issue of the Research in Action series, and we're so glad to have her participating in the webinar and able to share her expertise and answer your questions. Also, just knowing that if anything comes up throughout the email, so thinking about that sharing resources piece, if you share items with us, I do send a follow-up email after the webinar with any additional resources, anything that's not included in the PowerPoint or included in the Research in Action series, things that come up. I will be jotting those things down and I'll email them out to everybody who participated in the webinar. So if you're worried about some of those links or things, and sometimes the researchers will mention a study or something like that, and they can send it to me and then I can distribute it to everyone. So we're going to get started, but before that I just want to mention again that we do have a smaller group. So I think Lindsay Carlson, our Promise Fellow, she's another one of the organizers on here. She will probably unmute you, and then you can decide if you want to mute yourself and if you have some background noise. But you can also submit questions in the question box. There's a place where you can type questions and submit those to us. And Lindsay will also be keeping an eye on those, and she can share those with us as we go along. That's also a nice place if you feel like you don't want to interrupt or jump in just yet, or you have a question that you think could be answered at any time, or as you think of them, feel free to submit them, and Lindsay will guide us through that and figure out a good time to ask those questions. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, April. Can I just jump in also?
Yes, please.
Hi, everybody. This is Andrea Taylor, and I just want to encourage you all to ask questions because I think it'll be a much more rich and sort of interesting dialogue. So, sorry, April. I did not mean to interrupt you mid-sentence.
Oh, you can interrupt me mid-sentence anytime. I'm more than happy to have that. Actually, anybody can. And the last thing I just want to say is we also have, I just wanted to mention that my new AmeriCorps member, Shannon Carlson, I just want to give her credit for actually putting together the PowerPoint presentation for, if you look at your attendee list, she's on there, but she actually put together the PowerPoint presentation for this month's webinar, and it was incredibly helpful, and just wanted to acknowledge that, that accomplishment. I was really glad to have it. This is just the overview of what's included, so we've got a lot to cover in looking at engaging 50-plus adults as mentors. So there's all kinds of information there, and we're going to move through those. And to get us started, we've already got we've got a question that we're going to pop up here. But thinking about that, there's a quote from the brief that says Friedman has identified older adults as perhaps our only increasing natural resource. We've also looked at that older adult volunteers are more likely to be involved in relationship building with young people who are in difficult situations or in periods of transition or in educational endeavors than volunteers of younger ages. So they might be more drawn to this. But this is and Shannon included a picture of it, says Barack Obama with his grandparents. But are older adults a vast untapped resource for youth in need, or are we jumping to a conclusion that hasn't been fully explored? So we'll come back to this question later too, but Andrea, I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit more about that question, or if other people have comments or thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'll start out, and then if anybody has anything that they'd like to add, that would be great. I think that the research on sort of looking specifically at the 50-plus population is still kind of slim because there really are not a lot of programs out there that are focusing sort of solely on that age group. However, the research that is available really suggests that older adults make great mentors, and I think, April, you also kind of alluded to one of the reasons, which has to do with the way that they can really focus on certain kinds of things with kids. And I think that also people are at a life stage where they are really interested in kind of nurturing the larger community, so that what they did with their own kids, for example, they now are really both in a position and have interest in kind of taking that to the broader world. So I also think that we tend to have, I think in the mentoring field in general, we tend to have sort of an age bias going down toward the younger people as mentors. So I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of letting folks know that there's a huge resource out there and that you just have to find the right people, and your program and the kids in it will really benefit. You can tell I'm a little biased. And you can also tell my photograph that I'm in that age category myself. So. Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
Great. Anybody else have observations or things they want to share right off the bat here? Okay, feel free to just jump in and comment if you want. I think I see some of the that piece about older adults wanting to be connected with young people. Definitely, I mean, just in my own, you know, with my mom or with my my in-laws, and that they really want to be remain connected. So those that have actually retired, but even those who haven't, that's definitely something that they're continuing to be interested in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully some questions will pop up as we move forward. So.
Oh, sure. So looking at why older adults as mentors, and also kind of a profile of older adult volunteers, the research and action brief includes lots of information about kind of what older adult volunteers are doing, knowing that older adults do volunteer. We've got 60 million baby boomers between the ages of 55 and 63, but we are actually, we're talking about 55 plus, so we're talking about baby boomers, but also those who are even in the even older than the baby boomer category. But older adults do volunteer. There's just some interesting data about the numbers of volunteers ages 65 and older will increase 50% over the next 13 years. Numbers continue to rise as the youngest boomers turn 65 by the year 2029. Other pieces, I thought it was interesting that there were 30%, about 30% of people ages 50 to 64, and almost 25% of those older than 65 volunteered for an organization, or that they were doing, or 51% of people 45 and older reported formal volunteering experience, but that another 36% were reporting service to the community or individuals that might not be captured as that traditional and formal piece. So the AARP did this survey and looking at that, so thinking about what are those other activities that they might be doing. Lots more information there, but also looking at that the education and having children are two key predictors of volunteer levels, that the education level of boomers is higher than previous generations, and they're having children later in life, which might be some of that. Also looking at, so if we're looking at why older adults are as mentors, the motivation factor, that older adults are interested in and might be interested in leaving a legacy. So this idea of generativity, making a difference in the community and addressing a problem. And as we mentioned, that older adults have these competing demands on their time, but are setting contribution to community as a priority. So some of us might think of older adults having all this time on their hands, but in reality, if we're talking about boomers, they might have many things going on, but are still more than other age volunteers contributing to their communities and showing up to be volunteers. So the baby boomers their rate of volunteerism is 32.2%, which is higher than just the overall national rate, which is 26.7%. So as we know, they are there, and they have this motivation, and we're all trying to figure out how we can tap into that and recruit those mentors.
And if we just look at the sheer size of the cohort, I mean, I think every mentoring program I've ever worked with is always looking for mentors. And if you think that here's 60 million people who are in this kind of 7-year age span, and if we tap into a fraction of them and deliberately recruit them, then I think it could really be a boon to the mentoring field.
Yeah, I think it was at some point in the brief, Andrea, you mentioned that if we have 60 million, if just 5% of them, if we could just get 5% of the baby boomers, just the baby boomers, to volunteer as mentors, that would be close to 4 million people. We could close the mentoring gap.
Yep. Good.
So looking at, in the brief, there's a section, recruiting and retaining age 50 plus mentors. So how do we recruit these mentors, and then later we'll look at how do we, once they're recruited, how do we keep them there? So I thought it was just a really important part too, that oftentimes we're talking about older adults and we're thinking of them as this homogenous group, when in fact, even within that, it's very diverse. So thinking about, and diverse in regards to age even. So when we're talking about 55 plus, this is a huge range of individuals, and But then when we also look at ethnicity or socioeconomic status, different cultural backgrounds, where people are living, that those are things to definitely, as we would with any mentor, but thinking about keeping those things in mind as we create the right message for recruitment. Andrea, do you want to talk about creating the right message piece? Because there's some great examples and things.
This is actually really, really important, and it's not only important for recruiting people who are 50 plus, it's really important for anybody that you want to recruit. And I think one of the things that I often talk about is that many programs use kind of generic marketing materials. Some of them are created by Big Brothers Big Sisters, or they may be created by your kind of national organization, and I think that, or your local organization, and I think that they can be very helpful in terms of raising awareness that your programs exist. But one of the things about marketing is that you have to really know who your target market is, and you have to create a message that's really going to work for them. And it's the exact same principle that advertisers know very well, because they conduct focus groups up the wazoo trying to figure out how to market certain products to certain age groups and certain demographics. So that's also true for people going out to recruit mentors. And one of the things that we find is that different age cohorts are very much sort of influenced by the time in which they came of age. So, for example, I think the next slide may talk a little bit more about that, but I'm looking at, if I look at somebody of my age, for example, I'm 63, so I'm what's called a leading edge baby boomer. I came of age during the Civil Rights Movement, during the anti-Vietnam War movement, the beginnings of the women's movement, and I came of age with a bunch of people around me that we thought we could change the world. And boomers have sort of come into their later years still feeling very optimistic about making change and really wanting to connect and contribute to their communities in some way that's going to make a difference. So those are just, and the other thing about boomers is that many baby boomers are real workaholics, because there were so many of us in the cohort all doing the same thing at the same time. So when we were going to school, for example, there weren't enough schools and they had to be built very quickly. When we were trying to get into college, there was tremendous competition to get into college. When we were in the workforce, there was tremendous competition to get ahead, because, again, there were so many people. So one of the ways that you did that was that you worked harder and longer than the next guy. So one of the things that's difficult for people when they leave full-time work is if they identified very totally with their work situation, they feel sometimes really kind of unhinged at this prospect of retirement, whatever that might look like. So the way to tap into that is by creating marketing messages that help people realize that they can still have that sense of camaraderie, that sense of purpose, and that they can make a difference in their community. And so, that's just an example of how to take the time that people came of age and use that as a way of creating your messages. So, okay.
Yeah, that's great. And that wasn't on a slide, but it is in the brief talking about that when they came of age. And then going on to think about and creating the right message too, to consider messages and materials that are culturally appropriate. So, looking at different messages for maybe the African American faith community and how that might be different than targeting American Indian elders, and that there are some focus groups, and I've seen this happen when I've met with organizations here in Minneapolis and St. Paul who are interested in getting an intergenerational mentoring program going within their community. I'm thinking of one, it's a Somali group in particular, and sort of hearing about some of the elements of effective practice and all these best practices and things, really weren't interested or kind of realized that this concept of mentoring was really unknown to the older adults that they were working with, where they had really successful programming going on, or they had their elders showing up and helping young people, but to try to turn it into something formal with some paperwork and the idea of screening their elders was absolutely they absolutely would not consider doing that. It would be considered incredibly disrespectful to do that. So it was just an interesting piece, but to see that some focus groups regarding civic engagement reaffirm that and it was conducted with Chinese, Latino, Liberian, Somali, and Vietnamese older adults, again revealed that formal programmatic mentoring is just unknown to elders from these cultures because they're more collectivist in nature.
It's all about knowing your target audience.
Yep.
And so for all of you who are recruiting, and as I said, recruiting people of any age, the more kind of research you do about who you're going after, the better off you'll be. And and of course, the number one way to get people in is the personal ask. So I think recruitment is probably one of the biggest challenges in terms of running mentoring programs.
Yeah, I've also seen other programs get around that issue by using, maybe not calling their mentors mentors, using different terms. They had a Liberian group here that was focused on matching women with girls, and they called them play moms because when in Liberia, then girls would go away to school and they would have sort of their play mom or somebody else who stepped in as in that mentor role, this non-familial adult who would step in. So it's just important. I thought it was just really interesting to even think about, to remember that older adults are not this homogenous group and that they're diverse in many ways, and in particular what Andrea was talking about even within that they're diverse within their age diversity within that group. So then also thinking about retaining. So okay, now you've got these engaged and committed mentors, so how do you hang on to them? And no surprise to this group who's listening, if you've been through, this is your 8th research and action, programs that apply best practices to their infrastructure and activities do a better job of retaining mentors regardless of the age of the mentors. But also that there's this piece about that age 50 plus adults also want to know that they're connected to a viable organization. So maybe even more than other age groups are really interested in knowing that you're applying best practices, knowing that this is, maybe research-based or evidence-based practice, and that you have this a long track record, and that also mission-driven, and they want to know that their participation is really helping you meet the organizational goals. And also creating that sense of camaraderie that Andrea mentioned before then too. Also that mentors need this training and ongoing supervision, all these things that we've been talking about, these best practices about access to support from staff and other mentors. They need recognition. All of these strategies for matching adults and youth, all of the things that we've been reviewing and research has been showing is really important for mentoring programs. And that this last piece here, and we'll talk more about the best practices piece on the next slide, but this last piece about incentives and recognition is just interesting as another way of thinking about that socioeconomic diversity, that oftentimes we think of baby boomers as more affluent than other cohorts, and so maybe not thinking about the need for compensation. But this AARP study says that while 75% of older baby boomers say they're better off financially than their parents were, there's some variation in, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that was written prior to the economic downturn.
Yeah, exactly.
There are a lot of, we're actually doing some more recent research about, how this is affecting people, and what's happening is a lot of people, of course, are putting off retirement, or they're kind of they're working part-time, or they're continuing to look for work. And that does not preclude people volunteering, by the way. But it is, I think that the economy has really challenged people in terms of that sort of comfort level. People who thought they were going to be able to retire very comfortably can no longer do so. And unlike people of younger ages who still have many, many years to save for their retirement, people who are getting close to that time haven't got all that much time. So that's why things like even being able to cover transportation costs, for example, is a huge, huge thing.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions, is thinking about when this was written and thinking about our economic downturn. Um,
Yep.
but looking at that, there's this difference. There's some older adults with limited incomes where incentives or some sort of, thinking that mentoring is not free necessarily.
Mhm.
So providing transportation or any kind of stipend or things like that might be important. Whereas for other older adults, that public recognition and being um, celebrated for their contributions, that might be just as sufficient, and that they're interested in making the community stronger and interested in the needs of our kids, and that idea of generativity that might be there. But for others, they may need something else in order to make that possible for them. So another thing just to be aware of. Uh, so kind of looking back at the program retention, that mentors need these best practices and all of the different aspects that mentors need in order to be successful and in order to um, continue and to stay committed to the program. There's, again, these other program characteristics which are very similar to all the things that we've been talking about, but with some other takes here that, I think it's interesting to point out that whether the program's infrastructure and practice is more important than the model. So having looked at the research on school-based mentoring or looked at research on cross-age mentoring and previous research in action webinars, that we've learned that within every kind of model there's all sorts of variability in the quality of the best practice, the quality of the infrastructure. So are they using best practices? Thinking of the older adults or when advantage to school-based model might be that structured setting, which could be reassuring for some adults. But on the other hand, there might be mentors in school-based programs. This is what Andrea writes in the brief, that are feeling limited or by the classroom and would rather have a little more freedom or privacy to talk personally than when they're surrounded by other people. But ultimately, and that these best practices are, that we're looking at having pre-service training. Some of the programs that will, and Andrea will share more about the Across Ages program, but that has 12 hours of pre-service training. We can mention Experience Core, which many of you might be familiar with, which requires 40 hours of pre-service training. So thinking about that in line with some of our other programs that might, what kind of length of training do you require, but thinking about how important that is, providing in-service training and ongoing, that ongoing training throughout their match, ongoing supervision, which we've seen before and talked about how important the program staff is, and providing stuff and activities for mentors to do, and that family involvement, that mentors might appear to have better relationships with youth parents and caregivers when the programs help to facilitate that. So, and Andrea mentions that these best practices should be implemented in all mentoring programs regardless of the age, and that perhaps the only thing that distinguishes older adults from younger mentors may be the way that information is disseminated. So people 50 plus might prefer face-to-face training and personal interaction. Phone call might be more appreciated than an email. And interestingly enough, during this webinar, that an in-service meeting that's a social gathering might be more effective than the conference call or the web seminar or webinar like this. We might not want to deliver training to those mentors in this format. Whereas for younger mentors, for somebody, myself, I would prefer to receive an email from, I often click that box on which type of communication I might want to receive.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on this one too, because I
Yep.
do think that the communication is very much sort of cohort driven, I think. Obviously people who are Gen Xers who are generally in their 30s and the millennials who are generally in their 20s have grown up with technology. And it doesn't mean that boomers are, and even older people are not tech savvy, because I think many of them are, but it has to do with kind of what your preferred method of communication, particularly when you're talking about a program that involves developing relationships. I think that for many older people, they really prefer to see up front and talk to and interact with not only the kids, obviously, but with the staff and the people who are going to be supervising them. The other thing I wanted to mention about the activities and goals is, and a lot of the current research on best practices talks about the developmental and instrumental relationships. So the developmental ones are those in which the mentor really takes his or her cue from the kids and, really takes the time and makes the effort to find out what the child's interests are, and they kind of work together on that. So in some ways the relationships are really youth-driven. And then they should be then moving into a period of really setting goals and working on activities that help meet those goals, and that gets to the instrumental part. So, and again, it's best practices. I think very often we tend kind of not to think about how we're going to nurture these relationships, and that's one of the, I think, big issues around retention also, because when people have some clear structure, it really helps them to assess whether they're meeting benchmarks and where the relationship is going. So.
Great. And so looking at these and knowing that the outcomes for youth are going to be better the more these best practices are implemented, but to see, what do we know about intergenerational mentoring and its outcomes for young people? We have a definition here that intergenerational mentoring is defined here as youth age 10 or older matched with an adult 55 years and older. It's also mentioned that there's, as we've heard many times, that because there are still relatively few programs that specifically target older adults, so many of you might be engaging all ages of mentors in your program and maybe not a specific target at older adults, and so there's not a lot of evidence available or not a lot of research that we can look at that pinpoints that. However, there were several programs. The first appearance in the literature of older adult mentors is with Friedman's 1988 qualitative examination. So looking at that and realizing that that research suggests that the most effective mentors were those older adults who themselves had endured strained family relationships or battled their own personal problems, that mutuality of experience or having experienced the marginalization helped to develop those effective matches or effective relationships. And then the next piece of research that was mentioned is the public-private venture study in 1992, and that would have involved linking Lifetime's intergenerational mentoring with Temple University Center for Intergenerational Learning. So that, I'm assuming that involves you, Andrea, but that knowing that we have Andrea on the participating here and thinking about the across ages model, it's the and I'm struggling to think of the organization now, but it's, Andrea, maybe you can toot your own horn, that it's the only program recognized by the...
It's one of the, it's listed in the National Registry of Effective Programs.
Oh, thank you. I could not think of that right now. Great.
It's okay. It's been identified as a model project, and it was originally, Across Ages was originally funded by the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, which falls under the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And they put us through a very rigorous kind of set of guidelines and of evaluations, and we had this was originally funded as a research and demonstration project, and so we had a true experimental design. We had over 500 kids in our original sample. We had, comparison groups and the whole thing, and we had really statistically significant outcomes for the kids over a period of years. So, and then we were able to replicate ourselves, and another site replicated us and got the same, very similar results. So, hence, we are a model program. And what this means is that when communities apply for grants, not only drug prevention, but in a number of other areas as well, Department of Education, Juvenile Justice, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, communities are asked to replicate a model program that has evidence behind it. And so Across Ages is one of those programs. So I would estimate that I've done training for about 85 communities across the country. Unfortunately, not all of those programs are still going. I've been doing this training for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, and some sites got funded and then the funding got withdrawn just because of budget cuts and so forth. But there is still a core of sites that have been going for 8, 9 years. So
Right.
that's Across Ages. Do you want me to talk more about it, April? I'm not sure what...
Well, we can, looking here that, some of the youth outcomes, so compared to controls, we know that they had, as you mentioned, statistically significant positive outcomes. And so these included attitudes towards school in the future, attitudes toward older adults, self-perception, community service, improved school attendance, decreases in school suspension, all of these things, and also just the importance of, again, dosage. So the more mentoring a student received, the more positive effects. So that if their mentors were highly involved, they showed, or spent 6 or more hours with them per week, they showed significant differences on those measures compared to those whose mentors were less involved. And there were also... Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was also the quality of the mentoring.
Yeah.
Well. It was both the time and the kinds of things that they did together. So going back to what we were saying earlier about setting benchmarks and setting goals and also really allowing some of the relationships to be youth-driven, those were the relationships that thrived.
Yeah, and when we've been looking at, this whole series of research, knowing that dosage continues to come up, or that the longer, stronger relationships, one of the things we didn't mention before was, in talking about retention, is that the retention rate for boomers who are mentors is almost 71%, as opposed to, it was like slightly over 50% for boomers who volunteer in other general areas, but that they're being retained for mentoring. And so the brief is also mentioning some other studies that also show these positive outcomes for youth. There was a study, this Beth Johnson Foundation and Manchester Metropolitan University, but
that's in England, by the way.
Yep. And youth. So it was youth ages 10 to 13 at risk of failure, and this was all school-based and focused on academic and social support. But the outcomes for youth included, again, this improvement in academic achievement, they had self-confidence and improvement in self-esteem. Youth also reported having a special bond with their mentor and feeling that someone was available to them who cared about their well-being. There's also been, so this cites the Experience Corps school-based tutoring program, and that they've also shown some positive outcomes for youth. And I know there's a more recent study that I could send out, and thinking about, we were looking at even the Minnesota Experience Corps members, and that that connection with the adult is something that was being reported or highlighted as a really strong outcome. But they're scoring significantly higher in reading achievement tests, and that their misbehavior, including referrals to the principal, declined by half. So looking at that, but that not all, as Andrea's mentioned, that not all the programs are successful, and that poor program design or inadequate resources can really affect the outcomes, as well as that low amount of dosage. If the mentors and mentees aren't seeing each other enough, then we're not going to see the kinds of outcomes for young people that we would otherwise see.
Let me just mention something about the dosage also, because
Sure.
I know that 6 hours a week sounds like a lot of time, and particularly if you're out trying to recruit people. We did not say in our recruitment materials that we were requiring people to spend 6 hours a week. We basically said, 2 was kind of the ballpark. what we found, of course, was that when the connections were made and they were strong, that the mentors and youth chose to spend this much time together. So they might meet 2 or 3 times after school, or they would do things on the weekends. You know, that's kind of one of the ways that they got in all of these hours. There was something else I was going to mention about the time, too. Well, it will come back to me.
Okay.
I'm having my coming of age moment here.
And so here, then, what I love about this body of research and this body of literature is that we can also look at outcomes for mentors. We were able to see a little bit of that with cross-age mentoring, but with some general mentoring programs, we don't often look at what are the outcomes for the adults or what are the outcomes for the mentors in the program. And so, you know, looking at the research for older mentors, I mean, it shows that they have these incredible rewards from the experience, and that they're demonstrating improvements in physical and mental health, their perceived quality of life, looking at that retirement and aging can, what it says here is can produce feelings of diminished self-worth and lack of purpose, especially for those who have identified very strongly, as Andrea mentioned before, with their role as a paid worker, or if they were one of those workaholics or something, that involvement in programs with youth seemed to help them handle those feelings and feel less isolated, feel more of a sense of purpose. You know, volunteering later in life is associated with better health. Like it says here, fewer depressive symptoms. The Experience Corps volunteers noted that enhanced physical and mental well-being as well. There's things like increased physical strength, less time watching television, bigger social networks, more calories burned. I mean, all this information about the positive outcomes for mentors for being involved in these programs as well.
Yeah, and actually, again, there's a more recent study that the Experience Corps just produced, and it was published after this was written. I think it came out just last spring, but it really emphasizes. I mean, we all kind of know that volunteering makes us feel good, and that, you know, our mentors will say sometimes they think they get more out of it than the kids do. I mean, it's just you feel good by being able to do something positive for somebody else. But the physical health benefits that older adults experience are really quite phenomenal. So, April, I will get you the link to that study because I think people might be very interested in it.
Yeah. If you can get it to me, and I think I have it saved somewhere. I'm pretty sure I can pull that up. That's something I'll email.
Another strategy is become a mentor and improve your health. So.
Yeah. All right. So these great outcomes for mentors. So kind of our last section before we conclude and can fire away some questions then too, but some special concerns or considerations or to think about the age of the proteges or the mentees. Andrea was at the Summer Institute for Youth Mentoring, and I remember this conversation really well, thinking about that for the Across Ages program, the kids who were in grades 4 through 6, kind of ages 9 to 12, were most enthusiastic and excited about having a mentor. And I think a lot of us know this even anecdotally, that when they... Oh, go ahead.
Very much. Hello?
Hello? Oh, must be somebody who has to go. So we had, but enthusiastic and excited about having a mentor, knowing that if they start their relationship in their teens, that some of the peer pressure might get in the way of those relationships, but that if they started their relationship when they were younger, prior to 7th grade, they might be better able to survive those challenges and sustain that relationship into middle school or as they got older. This rural versus urban or suburban settings is something I appreciate, having been, I live in an urban area now, but grew up in a more rural area and have worked in both settings and thinking about the different challenges that programs face. So, and it mentions that, Andrea, that you have 25 replications of the Across Ages program in rural settings, and knowing that some of the challenges were about finding enough activities for mentors and mentees to do, access to transportation, so thinking about those older adults who might need help with transportation or getting places, and even young people. That's my experience of getting transportation to programs can be much more limited. And this confidentiality factor, so thinking about finding mentors who, if you're in a small enough community, mentors who don't already know the kids in the family or don't have some sort of connection there, so thinking about how do we start these relationships fresh without them knowing about whatever's going on with that particular family, or having those other connections. Other considerations is when overcoming ageism, so not something to be paid attention. It's not something to be ignored. We want to pay attention to that as a barrier to recruiting older adults, but also preparing kids and young people and thinking about their biases. I mean, we often hear kids say that I want a younger mentor, but think about how we can teach them or have some of their outcomes for the program be about what are their attitudes toward older adults, and thinking about I think often when asked would you would rather wait for a younger mentor or just have or be placed with an older adult, that they opt for being matched, but also that they can have some really positive relationships there and some great outcomes on both sides.
Yeah, sometimes it's not even worth asking the question, because
yeah,
if you ask a parent, for example, what age mentor would you like your child to have, many of them will say they want somebody younger. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, it's all about who the mentor is and his or her ability to really understand the kids, the kind of support that they're getting, their interest in doing this. And when you go out to recruit older adults, you're not going to be recruiting people who don't have the energy to walk from one block to the next. That's not who you're looking for. You're looking for people who still get out there and ride bikes, and who still like to go to baseball games, and and there are tons of people out there. So I think it's really just a question. We just have to overcome our issues around who people are when they get older. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm actually more energetic now than I was when I was in my 20s. So it's all perspective.
Yeah, and then finally, another thing to consider again are those cultural considerations, and that there's a suggestion that older adults from the same cultural background as their mentees may be especially effective in helping those youth understand their dominant culture while maintaining a presence in the community of origin. So. And also all those things that we talked about needing to identify appropriate recruitment materials, also training, not just for the mentors, but also for youth and families, and making sure that those messages are group-specific and culturally appropriate. So all of those different cultural considerations as well. So the initial question, if we think about that, are older adults a vast untapped resource for youth in need, or are we jumping to a conclusion that hasn't been fully explored? As we mentioned, there's just this incredible resource just on the sheer numbers. Again, if just 5% of baby boomers volunteered as mentors, we'd be close to 4 million people. And that doesn't account for those older than boomers who remain really active and vital into their 80s. Look, again, thinking about the reasons that 50-plus adults cite for becoming mentors, thinking about that leaving a legacy, or there's a quote from an Across Ages Mentors, some quotes where it says, Across Ages Mentors describe their ongoing and unwavering commitment in terms such as, I feel like my life has counted for something and it makes me feel worthwhile in this life. So how do we tap into that motivation? And then this another factor is the time in their relationship to time, that they might be able to give more unpaid assistance and emotional support to more people. uh, feeling less familial and more civic obligation than younger adults. And, you know, that I'm not sure where I was going with that for a second, but thinking about that their age and life stage have a bearing on the reasons that adults 50 plus get involved in mentoring, and maybe the roles they play as mentors, like the quality of mentor that they can be, that, you know, how available they are, how interested they are in making that difference, how comfortable they are in working with kids who might be facing some really significant challenges, that they might really embrace that kind of challenge because of that sense of making them feel worthwhile and really feel a sense of purpose along with that. But knowing that as with any age of mentor or any age of mentee, whatever your model, that those that use the best practices are going to have the most positive outcomes for everyone involved. And so we have time, and we've still got people here. Other questions for Dr. Taylor, for Andrea Taylor? We've got, there are questions. These are just some of the questions that are included in the action section of this brief. I'm thinking about, they're similar to those.
So, yeah, I'd love to hear if any comments or questions, or those of you who have, you know, people in this 50, 55 plus category, hopefully what's worked, what have been challenges. I can certainly speak to some of these, and I can go on forever on this, but I'd love to hear from some of the people in the audience. And I have to let you know that whenever I do a webinar, I stare very hard into the telephone, hoping that some face will appear before me and I'll actually see people. This is like, I much prefer face-to-face training, so I'm definitely one of those, you know, boomer types that likes to interact with people.
This is Lindsay Carlson, reading some of the questions that are coming in, that are being typed in. We do have one comment from Lisa Toft saying, "We are a very rural mentoring program with a high number of older adults as mentors. We have found that they do not rattle as easy and are very intentional in their interactions with our mentees."
Wonderful. Thank you for that comment. That's great. Thanks.
And we also have one other question just about getting some resources from you, Dr. Taylor. Question about providing the web address for the program that you started, and also the web address for the National Registry of Model Programs.
Okay, I can certainly do that.
So if those could be sent to April, yeah, we could send those along with.
Actually, I think our center's website, the Across Ages program, we're kind of an umbrella organization, and we fund we run rather a number of different programs. I wish I could say we funded them, but we actually go to other people for the money. But we run a number of different programs that bring older people and younger people together. And so Across Ages is one of those models. But we have lots of resources on our website as well. So I'll make sure that April gets all of that information, and then we can pass that along to you. The other thing that we also offer are, we do a lot of work with nonprofits around how to engage people 50 plus in compelling roles, and those roles can be mentoring or it can be other kinds of things. We have an online course that's totally free, that's very interactive, that will give you more kind of tips and ideas on some of the things that we talked about today. And then we also do webinars through our organization that focus solely on how do you create marketing materials, and then how do you use those for recruitment. So if you're interested, if that's a topic that you're interested in, April, if you can, you know, get information to me, or I could send it to you about when the next webinars are scheduled for. So we definitely have a lot of resources available that that you can access, and also please don't hesitate to contact me. I think my wonderful. So here's a page from our website, and my email address is there, and I'm really more than happy to have people get in touch with me. In fact, I did a couple of webinars a couple of weeks ago for Mentor, and I made that offer to have people contact me. And somebody was in Philadelphia she actually lives in Palm Beach, Florida, and runs a mentoring program there. And she came by my office, and we spent a couple of hours talking. So I really am open to having people contact me. So, any other questions or comments? Okay.
I was muted.
Oh.
Sorry. So the sharing resources page here, if you go and go to slideshare.net/training institute, then you can download this particular presentation and then have access to all of these links. So these are, many of these are the resources that are included in the research brief. Sometimes there are typos in the addresses, or some because this was published a while ago, some of the URLs have changed and things, so we have checked those, but you can get these. One thing to highlight is the Wisdom of Age. This is a guide for staff, which Andrea Taylor also put together, which is a handbook for staff, includes all sorts of training ideas and training activities about working with and preparing mentors, preparing older adults to be mentors. So it's a great tool that can be downloaded from Mentor's website here. So that's something that wasn't included in the research and action brief initially. Like we said, there's...
I hadn't written it then.
Yeah.
I just wrote it this year. So there's also a mentor handbook. It's called the Wisdom of Age Mentor Handbook. So I think you can access both of those.
Okay. Great. So these are just some of the other websites. We showed you the Center for Intergenerational Learning at Temple University. That's where you can contact Andrea, and we'll have that. So that link is here to get to a lot of those things. If you want to check out Experience Corps, it's another source of some of the research information, and we'll send that more recent study and some of that information. Other resources here from CNCS, so Generations United, another national organization, but we've got the links to different studies. LEARNS has some resources there as well. And for those of us who are in Minnesota, but you can, if you're from anywhere, you could check it out. Our Minnesota Association of Volunteer Administration, we work closely with MAVA, but they I've been working on a baby boomer initiative and have some great trainings, and actually have several trainings that are coming up in the next couple of months that might be interested to check out. And they will also be doing an abbreviated version of that, a presentation at the Minnesota Mentoring Conference in October. Let's see, we've got Points of Light, and that is at the end. We are at 1 o'clock, but if anybody else has a burning question or wants to ask one more question while we have Dr. Taylor here and on the line, feel free to fire away.
Well, April, I just want to thank you very much for inviting me to do this with you today. I really enjoyed it, and I always love talking about across ages. So fun. And I just think you've done a fabulous job in making resources available and raising awareness about all the material that's out there.
Well, thank you. Thanks to you for taking the time to you heard about all of the different across ages programs that Andrea is working with, and she's truly willing to help anyone, and so she's just been incredibly busy and taking time to come and sit down and be available to us. I appreciate it so much. Appreciate all of you for participating, and you can submit your questions more quietly via email when you go to the website, and you can contact Andrea with those questions. I will shoot an email out, a follow-up email yet this afternoon, and hope to see lots of you next month for the next webinar with Belle Lang and Jennifer West from focusing on Do Race and Ethnicity Really Matter for youth mentoring. So next one is in October, and that'll probably be my last one for the year because I will be going on maternity leave. So Lindsay and Shannon will be covering November when we talk about mentoring children of prisoners. But thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, April.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey.